Today on Public Research.
I think that what I'm proposing would allow Israel into the best position to respond to whatever happened. We are not going to be responsible for Gaza. Now let the other side make its move. The world have taught Gazans that they get everything for free. Some of them get very rich by it. Some of them, get the basic subsistence. But they rely on the world to take care of them. And I think that's the source of the problem. And what I would say is Gazans own responsibility on yourselves. Because once you will have to deal with that, I think you will have by far less time on trying to harm Israelis. I would let Gazans decide for themselves how they want to conduct their affairs. But it doesn't mean that I would tolerate any kind of security threat to Israel.
Eyal Ofer, Israeli commentator and researcher on why he believes Israel needs to radically disengage from Gaza, the insights of viewing Gaza from an economic perspective, the impact of UNRWA, and how Trump's radical plan for Gaza is changing conversation in the region. So first of all, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, I have been I would say, for the past 17 or 18 years as a hobby, investigating the Hamas economy from a viewpoint of OSINT, pretty much trying to understand the Gaza economy through the eyes of social media and various online tools that are available. On seldom occasions, I've also used other means to try and get the information. So I've been using OSINT to try and understand the way that Hamas runs Gaza Strip from an economical point of view. And that was my main focus. I'm probably one of the only people in the world who are doing this. Several other economists who have tried to understand the Palestinian economy always looked at the whole, the Gaza and the West Bank, and I was focusing only on Gaza.
What is the outlet that you write for?
I'm independent. I wrote for several of the outlets in Israel. Many years ago, I published articles on Ynet and The Marker and Globes, which is a financial newspaper. And now I write mostly for N12, which is the website of the Channel 12, which is the leading news channel in Israel, and also for Ma'ariv, which is one of the largest newspaper. It's not the largest, but I think it's the third.
So I came across your work because it's an interesting story. I went to a pro-Israel Twitter space hosted by this lady, Voice of the East. They were, and I'll be frank, usually pro-Israel Twitter spaces are pretty just low level, just bellicose stuff. But this one was fascinating because they were talking about this concept of this sort of total disengagement idea of totally disengaging from Gaza in a way that Israel actually didn't do in 2005. And I found it fascinating. And I had to look more into it because I thought it was such a brilliant idea, so much better than the stuff I'd been hearing, let's redo settlements, or the idea of let's spend 40 years reforming the education system in Gaza. So I tracked you down. And so let's go back to 2005, for instance. What happened with the disengagement from Gaza, and what do you think should have happened?
Okay, that's a great question. First of all, the word disengagement, I think, is the right word. However, it was not conducted over the years in a true fashion to the word disengagement. Israel indeed pulled out about 8,000 settlers from Gaza Strip. They were mainly in the area where what we call the Moasi, which nowadays it has turned into the so-called humanitarian zone in South Gaza. Israel pulled the settlers from there and was supposed to give the Palestinians in Gaza, give the Gazans the ability to conduct themselves. This could have been the test run of a Palestinian state. And indeed, initially, Israel tried to do that. But what happened throughout the years ended up with Israel being completely, I would say, being pulled back into dealing with Gaza over the years, and the other thing that happened was the Israeli establishment believed that actually they can control what's going on in Gaza by improving the economy there. Gaza has constantly been badgering Israel. Shortly after Israel have left Gaza, they started with rockets, and about a year later, they kidnapped Gilad Shalit, which was the first hostage from Gaza. And Israel constantly tried to fix Gaza from the outside. And the measures that Israel tried to use was, okay, since we are the main gateway to Gaza, let's try and use that. Israel completely ignored the fact that Gaza has a second border, and that second border is on the south with Egypt. And this was convenient both to Egypt, who didn't want to deal with Gaza at all, and to Israel, which thought that using economic measures, it can somehow fix Gaza and cause the Gazans not to be hostile. And that's the main story of the last 18 years.
So, what do you think Israel should have done in comparison to what happened?
I think that the word disengagement was the right word. Israel should have, and actually in June of 2007, when Hamas violently took control over the Gaza Strip from the Palestinian Authority. When Israel left there in 2005, the people who were in charge were the Palestinian Authority. In 2006, Hamas won elections and didn't really fully took control, although it have won the election. And then in 2007, it by force removed all the ruling people of the Palestinian Authority. It killed about 700 or 800 of them, mostly through people off rooftops and other means of really conducting a coup, and took control of Gaza. And at that point, the Israeli government took a decision, which I think was the right one. It declared Gaza to be hostile. I would say, I'm trying to translate it from Hebrew. It's a hostile semi-state. That's the way that it was defined. And Israel should have, at that point, treat Gaza like any other enemy state and relate to the whole territory as a whole, as an entity which is hostile. But instead, it got into this hybrid relationship where we continue to provide economic means, but also try to use those economic means in order to control the hostility emanating from Gaza. And that didn't work. But Israel have tried that for 18 years in various ways, sometimes to send less supply and less economic means, and sometimes showering them with a lot of them, hoping that being nice and developing the economy would cause the people not to be hostile.
So, just for the audience, what he's pointing out is that it was called a disengagement, but in reality, Israel was definitely still engaging with Gaza. They had a guest worker program for Gazans. They're providing electricity and all sorts of different stuff to Gaza and facilitating a lot of economic supports and things like that. So what do you think they should have? Israel should have. What should have the policy have been?
I would say what Israel did on 2010. On 2010, despite the whole world considering the Gaza being a territory under siege, Israel have actually conducted the opposite policy. There is a government decision, I'm not inventing this. You can go to the Israeli records and see that on June 20th, 2010, the Israeli government decides to open up commerce with Gaza. And I remind you, this is exactly 3 years after the government declares Gaza to be a hostile foreign entity. It decides to open up all commerce with Gaza other than military use material and to encourage the economy there. And since doing this in 2010, despite the fact that afterwards there were many cases again of rockets fired from Gaza. At that point, Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier, was still being held in Gaza. He was later released in a deal which brought to Gaza Yihya Sinwar in 2011. And over that time, Sinwar started to become the most prominent leader on the Gaza side. Eventually, he was elected in 2017 to head Hamas, but he had already been influential the moment he got into Gaza on October 2011. But still, Israel, despite having frequent wars with Gaza in 2012 and 2014, Israel continued to actually provide more and more, or to facilitate providing more and more resources, economic resources to Gaza, hoping that that would pacify the hostilities. Indeed, after 2014, there was no more any major war between Israel and Gaza. There have been about 6 or 7 between 2007 and 2014, but toward 2017 or 18, Sinwar developed a new method, which was to harass the border communities adjacent to Gaza with all sorts of what they call demonstration, where thousands of people would approach the fence, would set fire using balloons in all of the Israeli communities adjacent to Gaza. And this was something that Israel didn't know how to deal with, because it wasn't really a full-fledged war. It was conducted by thousands of people who were presumably civilians, but still it created havoc along all the Israeli villages, kibbutzim, that are adjacent to Gaza. And of course, periodically there were occasions where Gaza would launch rockets into Israel, sometimes 1 or 2, sometimes barrages of over several days of hundreds and thousands of rockets, extending the range, eventually getting into central Israel, to Tel Aviv, to the airport. And Israel had the Iron Dome, which prevented most of the casualties. So in a way, because of this defensive measure, Israel have pretty much tolerated being showered with rockets, but it couldn't deal with how it was, how the Gazans conducted the war adjacent to the border by setting fire and continuously harassing the agricultural work very next to the Gazan fence. And then they envisioned another method, which was, let's give them more money. And that's where the Qatari funding of Gaza to the tune of $30 to $50 million a month, roughly, $500 million a year, was pretty much sent into Gaza to the hands of the Hamas regime, and some of it was distributed to so-called the needy people in Gaza. Other parts of it were used to pay for electricity. Gaza doesn't have a lot of electricity, but what they have, they actually get for free. Part of it through this Qatari donation into Gaza, and that's how Qatar got a foothold and became a very important factor in the whole Gaza deal.
And now, well, I guess Netanyahu aide is going to be on trial as being some kind of Qatari agent. Interesting story.
I don't think it's.
I'm not alleging that.
No,
Netanyahu,
I just think it's a little bit premature. There is an investigation. I think that overall, the way that Qatar uses money to influence the whole world, academia, institutions, influencers, and people in the media. That probably, I'm not the expert on that subject, but I think this is worthy of a special show.
Right. Just an interesting fact for the audience: the life expectancy before October 7th in Gaza, I believe, was higher than in the state of Mississippi in the U.S. Just an interesting,
One of the things people don't understand, because the way Gaza is described as a kind of an enclave under siege, but since I use for my research a lot of social media, and there is actually one person, her name is Jackie, and she have a Twitter account called Imshin, IMSHIN, and she devotes her whole account for the last 7 years to show what Gazans are telling about themselves on social media. That's the only thing she does in her Twitter account. And what you have, and she's really showing it very, very clearly, is a place where there are luxury hotels, there are luxury cars, there is everything you can think of as far as malls and shops and restaurants and beach hotels, but it is also next to a very poor population. A lot of the population in Gaza are called refugees, although they are called this way despite, they don't live in tents, they don't live in camps, they live in high-rises, built-up cities, but those cities were built on places that used to be called refugee camp because their forefathers, grandfathers or even grandfather were considered refugees. And so this whole notion of Gaza being three-quarters of the population is refugees, and the fact that it is being described as open prison and under siege have confused people, together with the fact that there are real poor people also in Gaza. The disparity there is very, very big. People who are close to the Hamas regime got very, very rich from all the resources that the world was showering Gaza through the gateway of Israel into Gaza, mostly for free. So if you look at what happened to the Gaza economy, it continuously received resources from the world. Those resources were not distributed in an equal way. Some people got very rich, and some people got enough to sustain themselves.
What I looked into this, and I could be wrong. UNRWA, which is the UN agency to quote unquote support Palestinian refugees, they have twice as many employees as the UN does in New York.
That's very possible.
Yeah.
UNRWA has at least 13,000 employees in Gaza itself. Other than the government of Gaza, and the government of Gaza is a complex notion because some of it is being paid by the Palestinian Authority and some of it is the Hamas government. Other than the government, they are the biggest employer in Gaza. And they have also put a lot of resources into the Gaza economy. They, other than providing free education, free healthcare to about 3/4 of the Gaza population, because they consider them refugees. The Gaza is the only place in the world where the people who are considered refugees inherit their refugee status from their parents or from their grandfather or from their grandfather. And then anyone who is marrying into a refugee family also being received the label of a refugee. And the moment you get this label, then you get free funding from UNRWA, either, education, healthcare, and also food assistance.
Do you know the supermodel Gigi Hadid?
Yes.
Supermodel, born in 1995 in Beverly Hills, grew up in a mansion, child of a billionaire, a Danish mother, Palestinian father. That is considered a refugee of 1948. So born in 1995, but is a refugee of a war in 1948. Yeah,
yes, and that's how 3/4 of the Gaza population is being described as refugees and get, all their basic substance, food, healthcare, education, is provided for free by UNRWA.
And basically what it did, and it was very revealing, at the start of the war, somebody asked Hamas about, why don't you let people into the shelters? And they said, that's not our job. That's the UN's job.
من أجل أن نحمي أنفسنا من الطائرات، نحمي مقاتلين من الأنفاق. أما القطاع غزة فأنت تعلم والجميع يعلم بأنه 75% منه لاجئين، واللاجئين هو مسؤولية الأمم المتحدة في حمايتهم. مسؤولية الاحتلال.
Basically, the UN was handling what we would understand as governance, allowing Hamas to just focus on what it cares about, which is like killing Jews,
Yes, the person you were just quoting, his name is Musa Abu Marzouk. He, by the way, is a American citizen, as far as I know. He was convicted in the U.S. for funding terrorism, but managed to escape. And for several years, he was in Syria until the Syrian kicked him out, and now he's mostly in Qatar. He's one of the, quote, thinkers or the Hamas, what's called political wing, not the military wing, although, of course, there is really no difference. One is providing the ideology of killing people, and the other one is actually, the one doing it.
Yeah, I'd watch out because I'm not sure you should say he's American because now Colombia might have to offer him a tenure-track job. He could be the next president of Colombia. So this stuff about employment is very interesting. So what was the employment rate in Gaza before October 7th?
Oh, it was never more than 50%. It's a society where, as I said, some people got rich from commerce. A lot of people had good life because the basic substance was always provided for free. The fact that a lot of resources flow into Gaza for free allowed the Hamas government to always take a cut. So Hamas was actually funding themselves using all the goods that the world was showering over Gaza. They always took a cut of it. They always took some parts of it. And this is how they financed their other operation. And of course, what you had there was, there was a basic economy, construction, agriculture. And starting at around 2018, Israel, in its effort to improve the Gaza economy, have decided to actually, there were few small number of Gazans who were allowed to work in Israel since 2014, about 5,000. But then around 2018, Israel decided to increase those numbers about fourfold. And so 20,000 Gazans were allowed to go into Israel, exactly to those border adjacent communities. And since Gaza is relatively poor, the income that they would get by one day of working in Israel would be worth, sometimes more than a week's salary in Gaza. So those people were actually another boost to the Gazan economy, and Israel actually became one of the biggest employers of Gazans.
It's interesting. How many hospitals did Gaza have?
I don't know the exact number, but many. We're talking tens, of hospitals, probably closest to about 100.
100. Holy.
Close, it's not completely right to describe each and every one of them as a hospital. Some of them are clinics, but some of them are really large hospitals. Some of them were actually built by Israel when Israel had controlled Gaza in the 1980s and 90s. And many of them were built by all sorts of donations, like Qatar. There is the Indonesian hospital, donation from Indonesia. There is the Turkish hospital donation from Turkey, and the European hospital donation from the EU, and so forth. Jordanian. Every nation on earth, I think, have built some kind of a hospital in Gaza.
Okay, now let's talk about water, electricity, and internet. Before October 7th, where is Gaza getting those things from?
Okay. Electricity, Israel have, back in the 90s, helped build a Gaza power plant. And that power plant, when it is operational, provide roughly up to about 30 to 40% of the Gaza power. And by the way, Israel was very careful during this war not to bomb this power plant. And the rest of the electricity, roughly 60%, sometimes higher, is being delivered from Israel. There is a very small amount, about 5 to 10%, which is provided to Rafah from Egypt. There have been in the past plans to connect Gaza to the Egyptian main power network and to increase the amount of electricity from Gaza to Egypt tenfold, which would be a major boost to the Gaza electricity. But Egypt have traditionally tried to shy away from being connected in any way to Gaza. So it eventually kept the original small power networks that provided to Rafah. And sometimes when things fall apart there, technically, Egypt doesn't rush to fix it. As far as water, water is a very peculiar situation in Gaza because of the highly dense population. We should also note that Gaza has one of the largest natural growth in the world. Average Gazans family is about 7 people. The amount of population which is under 10 years old or under 16 years old is unparalleled to anywhere else in the world.
That's pretty high for a concentration camp. How many kids were born in Auschwitz?
Yeah. Gaza is definitely not a concentration camp, and even as I said, the borders with Israel were open. People used to call it, as if it is an open prison and nobody is allowed to go out. But again, if you look at what actually people in Gaza post on social media, they go via the Rafah border crossing to Egypt, and from there they post on social media videos from all over the world, including fancy resorts either in Turkey or in Egypt or in Indonesia. Yeah. So the Gaza population, when Israel disengaged from Gaza in 2005, the Gaza population was 1.3 million. And by 2023, the population is already 2.3 million people, after about 200,000 or 300,000 people emigrated out of Gaza over the last 10 years. So the population, the natural growth rate of the population have pretty much doubled in about 20 years. So we need to understand that all those resources that the world provided for free allowed a very large increase in population. Now, this population needs, of course, water and electricity. And as a result of the water consumption in Gaza, about 80% of the local wells, and since Gaza is very close to the ocean, to the Mediterranean, 80% of the wells already have salinity, which is you're not able to actually use the water as they come out. So what Gaza have been using is all sorts of desalinization, small plants of desalinization. There is one large one in central Gaza and many small ones in northern Gaza, but it also have 3 main water lines coming from Israel. And those provided at least 20% of the Gaza water. I may be wrong about the exact number, but that was the so electricity, Israel provided most of it, and water, Israel provided some of it, plus the electricity used for the desalinization plants that provide the rest of the water.
And so let's talk about internet. Israel's providing the internet?
The internet is there are local Palestinians internet service providers, but they are connected to the world via Israel, undersea cables.
So is it Israel's call whether Gaza has internet, or even if Israel didn't want it, they would still have it, or no?
Without Israel, they would not been able to have internet. The Gazan society, by the way, is very well connected. A lot of things in Gaza, for example, all sorts of funding that you as a Gazan family can apply for many grants, whether it's the World Food Program or UNICEF or Christian Aid or everything. It's all being done online. There are applications that are apps that are the way that the money is being sent to all those Gazans who have registered for those applications. And many of the Gaza population now, actually, the internet is one of the ways that they get money. because they're not being employed.
So if I had made you Prime Minister of Israel in 2016, let's say, how would you have changed policy towards Gaza?
I would let Gazans decide for themselves how they want to conduct their affairs. But it doesn't mean that I would tolerate any kind of security threat to Israel, whether it's being just being built or being used. So any threat that developed there, emanating from there, even before it is being used, I would apply military force to neutralize it. But on the other hand, I would completely disengage from meddling or providing any kind of economic connection to Gaza. They should decide for themselves how they want to deal with everything. And if their decision is to attack Israel, then Israel should have known how to defend itself, instead of fooling itself to think that if we shower them with a lot of economic means, there will not be any military threats coming from Gaza.
Okay, let's be specific. So you would shut down this guest worker program. That would be over, right?
Yes. And you know, as far as electricity, for example, I don't think it's something we should do from today to tomorrow. We can say, look, in about 16 to 18 months, we are going to cut the electricity ties to Gaza. Go figure out, build your own power plant, ask Egypt to provide you more power. 18 months from now, we are going to shut off the electricity connection.
Okay. And same with water?
Yes.
Okay, because they have indigenous methods of getting it, right?
Yes, but they have, you know, they have done so much over pumping that this whole area, without major desalinization of any water that comes out of the ground, is barely usable. It could be used for washing, but not for drinking or for agriculture.
But if Israel said, hey, in a year, 2 years, we're going to stop sending water to Gaza, is there a way they could still get water?
If you give enough.
Yeah, I think this is so fascinating to look, because I think there's a lot of truth to this, that looking at Gaza through an economic lens is really revealing. It's almost like a billionaire who, like, I don't know, hates another country or something for some reason. They don't have to work. They have a trust fund. And every day he's just giving them lectures. This is why we should attack Albania. We need to attack Albania. And it's like, oh yeah, and here's a blank check. And yes, there's some rockets over there. And it's like, yeah, of course they're going to be a full-time terrorist, right? Yeah.
Yes. There is a UN website. It's called, I think, FTS OCHA. I can, you know, send it to you. It details all the donations. FTS is for financial tracking services or something like that. It tracks all the funds that the UN manage all over the world, to the tune of about, I think overall there it's about $43 billion of donations. Out of that, in 2024, Gaza got about 3 billion, so around 9%. And if you make the calculation per capita, per person, you'll find out that Gaza is receiving 7 times more than Sudan, which really has severe famine, about 17 times more than Yemen, which had really bad real famine, and about 60 times per person than Congo in Africa, which also is a very poor country. And if you compare it to Afghanistan, you'll also get, you know, the average Gazans get, I forgot the number, but it's roughly, you know, comparing to some countries, Gazans get 100 times more per person than those other countries. It's unbelievable.
It's also unbelievable. Again, before October 7th, higher life expectancy than Mississippi, a state in the United States, the richest country in the world.
Yes.
It's remarkable. Okay, so I've heard some counter arguments to this idea. The first thing I heard when I was talking to someone very smart about this is about the sewage system. And they said if the Gazans really screw up the sewage system, because it's so close to Israel, that it would affect Israel. It could like ruin, I don't know how it works, the water supply for Israel. What's your response?
The reason it might impact the water in Israel is because Israel using a lot of desalination of ocean water, and the closest desalination plant in Israel is about 50 to 60 kilometers from Gaza. And unfortunately, the constant current in the Mediterranean is indeed from Gaza toward the direction of Israel. Now, I would say that I think that even now, Gaza dumps sewage into the ocean. And part of being a responsible people and responsible country is to take care even of your sewage, not dumping it to the ocean, harming other people drinking water, which is 50 miles away. And I think that Israel should mandate that that's the first thing that Gaza would take care of. Now, there are the facilities in Gaza which are being used to treat sewage, and the electricity should first of all be used for that.
Okay, so but you don't accept that the sewage thing okay, I'll leave that aside.
I'll tell you it more generally. Gaza is very close to Israel. Gaza can cause a lot of environmental damage to Israel, and that's exactly what they did in 2018. They were basically torching up the fields around Gaza. They were using balloons, the same way the Chinese sent this balloon who got to the US. They have used a very ancient method of war. They had those balloons together with incinerator devices, and they flown them across the fence into Israel, setting large areas on fire. That's a method of war. And I said, we will treat any method of war, including environmental war, as something that we will not tolerate.
Okay, so then let me continue to play devil's advocate. Yeah, I guess people who oppose your idea, they would say, it's a nice idea, but because the Gazans would inevitably, either ruin the sewage system, do this environmental pollution, or attack Israel, Israel would end up in the same place. It would end up back in Gaza, having to occupy it eventually, no matter what. What's your response to that?
I always hope that Israel would not be forced to reoccupy Gaza. And even now, you can see that Israel is actually trying to do its best not to have its own troops everywhere in Gaza and control it. I actually welcome the ideas of President Trump, because he have introduced something that people have not been pretty much allowed to think until now, which is if Gaza is so overly populated and has such problems, some of the solution is for people who want to, at least, emigrate out of there. And I think that Egypt, as the country that actually have provided the ability to Gazans to smuggle weapon, which was used over the last 20 years to harm so many Israelis, also bear responsibility. They bear responsibility to help provide for Gazans, but also to allow Gazans who want to leave Gaza to migrate via Egypt to other places.
Okay, I want to get into the Trump plan in a second, but before we get there, I want to ask you about, in your vision of things, what would happen with the Rafah crossing? Because I had been thinking, why did Israel do these wars in 2009 or 2014, discover all these tunnels and these weapons? Why didn't they just go back to the Rafah crossing and try to shut down the smuggling? But actually, what's interesting is you totally disagree with that, right? You don't want
Yes.
any presence there. Now, what would you say to somebody who said, "Oh, great, so under your vision, we can just let the Gazans bring in like even more dangerous weapons to attack us from Egypt"?
Let me first explain that and it ties to economy. First of all, to build this army that Hamas have built require resources, economic resources. The best economic resources flew into or were flowing into Gaza via Israel, including many raw material that Hamas have used to build rockets to send to Israel. So I'm not discounting the fact that Egypt have allowed Hamas to smuggle weapon and a lot of it, but I'm saying that also many portions, both the economic part as well as some of the tools, machinery, and raw material that were used to build weapon inside Gaza have arrived from Israel. So there were two sources, and of course, Israel can completely control the one that is on our side. And we should indeed demand from Egypt. Egypt is not a, uninvolved neutral party. Egypt have indeed allowed Hamas to smuggle weapon. And you cannot just prevent the smuggling by putting someone on the border itself. The whole smuggling operation is being conducted, all over the Sinai Desert, which is where Gaza is adjacent to the Sinai Desert of Egypt. And we should demand from Egypt to stop the smuggling. But also we have enough intelligence. And if we need to even go in and dismantle any kind of infrastructure that is being built in Gaza, whether it's being smuggled, but whether it's being developed internally. I'm not discounting the fact that Israel might deal with Gaza in a military way.
Right.
But
Okay.
what I mean is we don't need for this ability, we don't need to control this border 365 days a year, and by that declare ourselves as the party that completely surrounds Gaza and responsible for what the civilian population gets.
Right. I was reading your writing as you were pointing out, when Israel takes control of the Philadelphia corridor, illegally, I think it is an international law thing. Also, it does take on this responsibility. One last detail. What would your preferred policy have been with the water, with the fishing? You wouldn't have allowed, Iran to ship a nuke, to the port in Gaza. Right?
Again, I think that, luckily the laws of a maritime blockade are much more ancient than the Geneva Convention, thanks to the British Empire and the British fleet navy of the 16 or 1700. It's perfectly legal for Israel to say Gaza is a hostile territory. We are not going to allow any kind of maritime connection directly into Gaza, which is unsupervised. By the way, we have enough intelligence so that if a ship really that have some kind of protesters like the Marmara was in 2010, we could allow it to go in. It doesn't really had anything that is dangerous. It was more of a ploy to cause Israel to look bad. So if there is a real threat coming into Gaza via the maritime route, Israel has all the right to stop it. And so Gaza can be connected to Egypt. There is a port in El Arish. There is a port in Port Said. There are other ways to get supply into Gaza.
One thing I like about your idea is the PR effect, that Israel could have, I just imagine it, given a speech, said, look, we heard you, you protesters, we heard you, we agree. We're ending the occupation. They're free. Do whatever you want. Have a great life. We're going to do our thing over here. You guys do your thing. Please don't attack us. If you attack us, we will respond accordingly, as any nation would. I love that part of it.
I would say even more, not just if you attack us, if you are building something that might be a threat, we can monitor what's going on there. As soon as some threat emerges in Gaza, we will deal with it militarily in any way that we want, from the air, from the sea, by sending in tanks, sending troops, whatever. We are going to protect ourselves proactively. But on the other hand, we are not going to deal with anything civilian or economic in Gaza. We are not going to be the provider. We're not going to be doing punishments of narrowing down the amount of merchandise going into Gaza, because nothing would be coming from us. Deal with Egypt.
I think it's a very elegant solution. So I want to close on the current situation, touch on the Trump plan and the situation. But for my audience, because the problem, I talk about this a lot when Americans discuss Israel, is, if you judge Israel by the standards of an NPR listener from Vermont, it's not fair, because Israel lives in a different region, okay? Your neighbors are not Finland and Sweden, okay? You're surrounded by people who want to murder you and your family. And so a lot of the discussion, I think, can sort of shock American sensibilities, but it needs to be contextualized. So I want to play a video and get your response to it, but also to frame the discussion. Okay. Now, this is a big TikToker. And actually, a few months ago, I guess he was detained by the IDF, and a lot of pro-Palestine accounts denounced it. This innocent Gazan journalist kidnapped by the IDF. So I'm going to play this video he posted a few days ago. And I guess I'll try to translate it for the audience. I'll say it out loud.
تعرفوا احنا يا اخوان وين؟ احنا اقرب
So, my brothers, do you know where we are?
احنا اقرب
We are closer to our Palestinian cities than to our home.
مدننا الفلسطينية من دارنا. مدننا
Our Palestinian cities that were occupied in 1948.
الفلسطينية اللي احتلوها في عام 1948 وهجروا
that our ancestors were displaced from.
أجدادنا منها. بإذن الله.
God willing, we will return.
بإذن الله راجعين. طوفان جديد.
A new flood, which is a reference to the Al-Aqsa flood, which was the October 7th attack. A new flood will free our occupied lands. He means all of Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, all of it.
لنحرر أراضينا المحتلة ما يكون بيننا وبين إخوتنا.
Between us and our brothers, the people of the West Bank, and the people of 1948.
أهل الضفة وأهل 48 ما يكون في بيننا حواجز ولا جيش.
There will be no barriers, there will be no army or anyone between us.
ولا أي حد بس فلسطينية ونفطر في.
There will only be Palestinians. We will have breakfast in Jerusalem, lunch in Gaza, and dinner in Jaffa.
القدس ونتغدى بغزة ونتعشى بيافا.
I play that because he's saying we're going to do, and they've said this a lot. We're going. We have not. One might have thought they learned a lesson from what's happened since October 7th, and he's saying, nope, we're going to do it again.
Yes. I live very close to the Mediterranean, on the shore of the Mediterranean. 10 miles from me this way is the West Bank. 10 miles, that's it. The people in the West Bank think the same way as this kid that you have shown in the video. They basically want to take over every part of Israel. The width of Israel where I live is about 10 miles. That's it. From the sea to the West Bank. My sister lives much closer. She lives 8 miles from me, which means that she lives less than 2 miles actually from the West Bank. And of course, this is the situation where we in Israel still been able to live in a free democratic society. 20% of the population is Arabs, Muslims, Israeli citizens that have full rights. But still very next to us, there are people whose only desire is eventually to kill us and take over this land. The same way that we can deal with this situation, we should, not think of Gaza in any different way, except that Gaza, since it is so isolated territory, it's not really close to Israeli population center. It has direct route to Egypt. This is where we can conduct ourselves geographically in a different way. I wouldn't use the same solution that I'm proposing for Gaza to the West Bank. It's not going to be the same solution. And if we need in Gaza to, for example, take over a piece of land of roughly 3 miles close to the cities in southern Israel, which are adjacent to northern Gaza, Sderot and Ashkelon. If we need to take some part of land to create a buffer zone to prevent this kind of kid to be able to cross into Israel, well, we need to do that. Sorry, I know that the Gaza Strip is very narrow, it's not very big, but if you are a threat and the only military way for us to be safe is to narrow down the strip even further, we will have to do that. But it doesn't mean that we will take over areas where population live and start taking care of that population. If we need to clear a buffer zone of 2 miles close to Israel, then we would use this area as an empty buffer zone, like a DMZ between South Korea and North Korea. Nobody would go in.
Have you heard the mathematician Eric Weinstein's proposed policy?
No.
The right thing to have done, in my opinion, is very simple. Israel has a claim on a lot of land that it controls. And the Arabs have a claim on the same land. There's 2 competing claims. If you take the Israeli claim, you say, look, this land is ours. But we are not pigs. And we are not so attached to this land, and we are not so blind to your needs that we would not give you a portion of land that we consider to be ours because it comes from our tradition. We have a schedule. If you want to live as brothers in peace, there are arguments between brothers and families, but if you want a prosperous state, you go this many days without any loss of life due to terror, jihad, or any of these things. And we will cede this land to your future state so that they're guaranteed that there will be a Palestine, even though we consider the land to be ours. You're interested in rape? Here's how many acres we will annex. You interested in murder? You interested in blowing up families? You want to take an egged bus over a cliff? Whatever it is that you're thinking about, here's the schedule of the acreage that you will lose. We will have an annexing ceremony, and we will name it after your victims. Whatever town, whatever settlement that we're going to put in that, and it'll be permanently a part of Israel. And so that way, when you do something to us where you're begging us to kill you and your children, to blow up your buildings, to bulldoze your houses, we're not going to fall for it anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to have a ribbon cutting ceremony. And what we're going to see is a larger and larger and larger state of Israel as your moronic death cult continues to grind against innocent life.
He proposed that Israel give a speech and establish a mathematical equation, which would be something roughly like if every, every 100 rockets you launch on us, or every Israeli that you kill with one of your rockets or terrorism attack, we're going to take a kilometer of Gaza. And we're going to do a dedication ceremony in each location, and it's going to be dedicated to a victim of terrorism.
I think it makes sense. I think we should not look at taking land as something for Israeli settlements or expansion or anything. We should conduct ourselves so that we are safe from any Gaza threat. And so if the measure that we need to take is to take some part of Gaza from a military standpoint and not allow anyone to be there, we will do that. And if this will cause Gazans at some point to have to move to other location, again, I said it's their decision. Israel should give them the freedom to conduct their affairs. But if they choose to use this freedom to attack Israel, there are consequences. And part of the consequences is that they're going to lose some part of the land. But it doesn't mean that we will be there, controlling their life and taking care of them. We will just take the land. Part of it to be safe on our side.
I'm very open that I consider myself a learner on this issue. I'm not fluent in Hebrew. I don't know Arabic. I'm not an expert. You're an expert. So I'm learning on this. And I'm very open that I have no certainty on this issue. I want Israel to survive. I think when I see an anti-Zionist Jew in America, I just think they have no idea what the world would be like for Jews globally without Israel. It would allow another Holocaust. It's hugely important. But I'm not exactly sure about what is the right path, the right or the left there. So I had a previous guest on, and here's the argument he makes about the Palestinians. The constant settlement expansion has made Abbas look like a clown, a feckless clown. So if you're a young guy in the West Bank, of course you're going to support Hamas. Because they're fighters. How can they back Abbas, who just allows the Israelis to go deeper and deeper into the West Bank? What's your response to that?
Ehud Olmert was the prime minister of Israel in 2006 to 2009, have tried to, and he was not the first, of course, have tried to create a peace agreement based on the formula of land for peace in the West Bank. And he have just recently shown the maps that he have given to the Palestinian negotiators, including Abbas, which was, I don't remember the exact percentage, whether it was 95 or 98 or 96% of the West Bank. But they refuse. They refuse because right now the Palestinian ethos is not, is not to desire of the two-state solution so that there is a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. They basically want everything. So they refuse any kind of offer that was made to them, arguing that this is because of settlements, when Israel has shown again and again that it is willing to dismantle settlements for peace. We used to have settlements in the Sinai Desert, which is today Egypt. We gave this land for peace. We used to have settlements in Gaza. We took out all those settlements from Gaza and allowed Gazans freedom to conduct their own affairs without Israeli soldier or Israeli settlers anywhere in Gaza. So I would say if the Palestinian people are really serious, the settlements are not going to be what's blocking the ability to have peace. I think we are at a much very different situation all over the Arab and Muslim world. they see Israel as something that should not exist where it is. The notion of from river to sea really means all Israel. They want it. So we are not in a level of discussion of whether the settlements are the problem or not the problem. If they would be the only remaining problem, they will not exist.
Okay, the question of Gaza and Hamas, how different are those things?
Hamas is first of all an ideology. It's an ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an organization that basically wants eventually to take over the whole world. You know, the only difference between the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Hamas, and in some way Turkey and Qatar, to Iran, is that Iran wants the whole world to be Shia Muslims, while the Muslim Brotherhood wants all the world eventually to be Sunni Muslims. That's the only thing that they disagree between themselves. They're killing each other over this, by the way. The Muslims killing Muslim by far more than Israelis kill Muslims in wars. But this whole idea that Hamas manifests is a much larger idea that is prevalent in many parts of the Islamic world. And we should understand this. This is the reality.
Okay, so this is difficult to discuss. I'm going to play a clip of two Israelis talking. This is from a show called The Western Spirit with Ariel Whitman, and the guest, I think, is Rebecca Bar-Saf.
No way to remove Hamas. Absolutely no way.
But they're not going to agree to end the war
It doesn't
with
matter.
the transfer.
Okay, it
So
doesn't
there
matter. We don't need their agreement. The only thing we need is to get to the point where the Israeli society is mentally prepared and the world sees that there is no other way than remove each and every person that lives in Gaza right now from Gaza. This is where we have to get to.
But who is going to remove them?
Well, you see,
That's the problem, no?
that's not the problem, because it becomes very much easier when everybody agrees on that.
But the Gazans don't agree on that.
So where to begin? It's not a very great look. So I could start on the PR stuff thing, but also just I've seen this a lot where and later in this discussion she just says they have to go, and then he says, well who's going to take them, and then she sort of responds like, well, they gotta go. And I've seen this a lot. Let's leave the legality, morality aside for a second. First question. If I'm a guy, can the Gazans get in? Because isn't there like 2 border fences now? Can they even get into Egypt illegally now?
Egypt have built a very massive wall. In fact, more than one wall, several of them on its Gaza border. Israel have not protected its border good enough as Egypt did. Egypt really built an unpenetrable border between Gaza and Egypt. They have really done a good job in building that wall from their perspective. But I'm saying that Egypt has responsibility, and that responsibility is to facilitate for Gazans who want to leave. They should be allowed to leave via Egypt. There could be other methods for Gazans who want to leave. I'm not going, to suggest to remove them by force, because I think that the legality and the morality do play an issue here. But definitely, anyone that has the ability and want to leave should be allowed to do that. That's, very basic in all over the world. People can migrate.
Eyal, I was joking that when Trump said his proposal, I screenshotted all these people who say it's a genocide in Israel, like Francesca Albanese, Yanis Varoufakis, all these people say it's a genocide. And they basically were saying, I would summarize as, Israel is doing a genocide to the Gazans in Gaza, and the world must make sure that the Gazans who want to leave cannot leave the genocide.
Yes, if you remember, at some point, Egypt was considering to join South Africa in the genocide trial of Israel in the International Court in Hague. But on the same time, you know, exactly like you said, they're arguing that there is a genocide there, but then they don't let anyone escape. By the way, they're a signatory to the World Refugee Convention. They should allow people who are in harm's way to escape from a location where they're being jeopardized. And they're not doing this for the Palestinians. They're refusing to take anyone. They allowed certain number who have been paying $5,000 per head per person to travel through Egypt to other countries. They made a fortune out of those Gazans that they did allow to leave.
Well, you remember in in the 1940s when the St. Louis ship went from Nazi Germany and tried to come to America. You remember how all of the Jewish publications in America demanded Roosevelt not let them in, right? Right.
I don't know this part of history.
No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Okay.
How absurd!
I do know that the St. Louis was eventually sent back to Europe. That's the part that I knew.
No, they were begging for America to allow in Jewish German refugees because it was a genocide and they wanted them to live. So they wanted them to be able to leave. You know.
I think that this is part of what I think is refreshing in Trump's plan. It is forcing the Arab world to take responsibility. They constantly use the Palestinian as a way to keep the hostilities against Israel alive for 70 years, refusing to take any responsibility. They created this problem both by part of it was the ideology, but also by the way that they conducted themselves 70 and 50 years ago. And they were able to disengage from the Palestinian problem and say it's only Israel's problem. The world would pay for it. Israel will have to fix it. We have nothing to do with it. Not Egypt, not Jordan, not Saudi Arabia, not Iran, not Turkey. Nobody has anything to do with the Palestinian problem. It's Israel. It's your problem alone. Okay, and I'm saying, no, it's not.
I see what you're saying about changing the conversation. I understand that. But the logistics, it's a little bit crazy, right? So, like, for instance, Egypt says no. So how does that work? How?
Well, that's where my suggestion plays a role, which is Israel doesn't provide the economic means for Gaza reconstruction. And by doing this, if you think of what happened over the last 17 years, everything that you see built in Gaza was basically provided through Israel. Egypt was not very willing to provide Gaza any economic means. It did provide them, the ability to smuggle weapons, because that was used against Israel. But they were not very keen on trying to help Gazans build Gaza. And I suspect that once Israel economically disengaged from Gaza, the ability to reconstruct Gaza, the amount of resources needed that would have to go through Egypt, that's not going to be very simple. And so we are going to see a situation where more and more Gazans individually will decide that it's better off for them to leave Gaza. I'm not going to force anybody, but I'm not going to be the one that provide the economic means to stay in Gaza.
I have an Israeli friend, what he told me, and again, this his idea. He said, what we should do is we should take control of the Rafah crossing, that border area. And all we should do is just have undercover Israeli Arabic speakers facilitate illegal immigration to allow people who want to leave Gaza over like a 5 to 10 year period. Because he said, if you do anything open, it's just not going to happen.
I sympathize with this dream, but Egypt is there. and Israel cannot replace Egypt. And so we have to take Egypt into consideration, but at the same time, make a very basic demand. Egypt should allow people who want to get out of Gaza via Egypt to get out. It's the most humanistic thing to do, the most humane thing to do.
So let's say, do you think that Israel and the United States could actually find countries that would resettle Gazans?
I'll tell you the way that I look at this. I cannot predict the future. And certainly the future has many options. What I think of it is in terms of game theory, which is Israel needs to make a move which would position itself in the best position to respond to anything else that the other side would be. And the other side is a multi-party game. There is Egypt there is Saudi Arabia, there is Hamas, there is the Gazans people individually. There are many players in this. I think that what I'm proposing would allow Israel into the best position to respond to whatever happened. We are not going to be responsible for Gaza. Now let the other side make its move.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, do you think, like, anyways?
I cannot predict all the moves because they're not dependent on us. I just want to be in the best position to respond. Maybe Egypt would decide to take responsibility. Maybe Egypt would decide, that it wants to control the Gaza Strip as it did until 1967.
Right.
And maybe Egypt would approach Israel and would say, hey, we want to annex Gaza back into Egypt, the same as it was until 1967. We would take care of security. Nobody would harm you. That's a reasonable offer that Israel should consider.
Yeah. The Trump plan, the idea, though, of giving the United States the ownership of Gaza, that is crazy, right? Because if, let's say, Israel agreed to that, Trump, a Democrat, gets elected in 4 years, they're not going to continue running the Trump Gaza casino, right?
I don't understand in American politics. That's one thing I barely understand in Israeli politics, but American, definitely not.
Right, but but you wouldn't want to give ownership of Gaza to the U.S., right?
If I need to look at this from an American perspective, I would, think of maybe having a Navy base somewhere in the Mediterranean.
I've heard some people talking about that, but again, if AOC gets elected, she's not.
Well,
right.
It's really up to the American people to decide on the American politics.
Right. So, to close out in a larger sense, there's a poll that came out that says that among Democrats, like 40% are opposed to Israel. It's getting worse. And I'll give you a recent example. Have you seen this?
No.
So this is from Emma Vigeland. She says, just make the hair blonde instead of red, and immediately becomes identifiable as Nazi-style racial supremacist propaganda by modern-day Nazi Zionists. She's calling 90% of Jews Nazis because we're mourning the death of an infant who had red hair. It makes my blood boil.
I agree with you.
But this, I think of it as a religion, this anti-Israel thing in the U.S. It is like a secular religion. It is so large. I know Israel has so many challenges, but the PR war, the worsening relations with the Democrats in America, how much is that something you worry about?
It does worry me for many years, actually. And I think that the whole world does not understand what I was talking about earlier as far as the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not all Muslims, of course not, but there is large population of people in this world who listen to Al Jazeera and getting their information from sources that basically are tied to the ideology that eventually Sunni Islam should control the whole world. We need to understand that some people in this world see Al Jazeera and other sources as legitimate sources, but on the other hand, those are sources that are trying to get to in the long run for the whole world to be Muslim. And Israel is just in their way. Israel is just in the Middle East, where they considered their core geography, where they want to first control all of it, and from there to expand. And this is why, for example, since Islam at some point controlled Spain, and it used to call it Andalusia, this is also a region which they considered should go back to be Muslim, because from their perspective, anywhere that the Muslim Caliphate ever held territory, this from here on and to eternity is owned by the Muslim Caliphate, the Muslim Ummah, the whole Muslim nation. This is an ideology of some of those countries and people around us.
I wanted to ask, what is your scheme? You had a scheme for getting the hostages back.
I at some point suggested that Israel would completely occupy the whole part of northern Gaza, take over the whole territory of northern Gaza, evacuate all the population from there. At that point, there were about 300,000 people in that area, and would eventually trade back this area in exchange for the hostages. So that the Hamas would be facing a dilemma of losing the major geographical area of the Gaza Strip and being squeezed into the southern part of the Strip, or returning the hostages.
What should Israel do now?
It's a very, very tough question. Very, very tough question, because it's going to be very, very hard for Israel to again go back to conducting a war after we have allowed most of the Gazans, internally displaced people, to go back into northern Gaza. The northern Gaza is the most important part for Hamas, because it was the capital of Gaza. It's the main economic area where the main population lives. It's closer to Israel. It's very easy from there to attack Israeli railway line, and the adjacent larger communities in Israel are adjacent to the northern Gaza part, where on the south there is almost only very, I would say, sparse agricultural communities. So we are now facing in a tough situation, and I think that the only way to win this is start again with northern Gaza. First thing I would do would be to close off all the crossing where we provide aid to northern Gaza. I think this is the fact that we are voluntarily providing aid to a territory where we are being attacked from is completely insane. On the other hand, Gazans should, be able to receive food or anything they need, but we should facilitate this only on southern Gaza, only from Egypt, not via Israel. And I think this would place us in a much better position than we are now. It may take a long time. It's not going to be something that will be will bear fruits within a week or two. And for the hostages, every second is needed, unfortunately.
So do you want to go forward with phase 2, try to get out as many remaining? I agree. They're going to lie. They'll keep a hostage. But try to I think it's pretty compelling. The argument is, let's just try to get as many living hostages back as we can, and then we'll quote unquote end the war, and then we can whatever, go back.
Look, Hamas have now, we don't know exactly how many are alive. Maybe 22 hostages are still alive. There were different numbers between 19 and 24, but most likely the right number is 22. I don't see Hamas giving all of them almost under any condition. Now, could there be some kind of a pressure over the next week or 2 weeks and we get 4 more or 8 more? I would try to get as many live people as we can. I don't think Israel should do anything to receive dead bodies. That's a big mistake. But to get as many live hostages out of Gaza as we can, of course.
But what if the cost is they have to, sign an agreement to end or fully leave the territory?
I don't see Hamas completely giving up everybody.
Right.
And I think that Israel should start conducting itself in a way that Hamas also has things to lose. Because if you're constantly just giving them aid, giving them electricity, giving them everything, time is not a factor. They don't lose any part of territory if they stretch the negotiation over months and months. So part of my plan, which perhaps the translation was not that great, was also for Israel to set a line that says this is going to be, and it's pretty much similar to what you described as mathematician proposal, set a line that says this is the part of Gaza where we're not going to return it forever. We are going to take ownership of that piece of land, and we can move this piece of land by 50 meters every week. It doesn't need to be a whole lot, but it can be, an acre a week. We can do the math. It doesn't really matter. But something that sends Hamas a very clear message. Every day that you're still holding the hostages, there is something that you lose.
Do you agree with me that the whole defeating Hamas goal is sort of a dumb goal? It would be like an endless task.
In many ways, yes. I wrote an article about it in 2021. Of course, now things are a little bit different. But this whole notion as if there is, this Gaza population that is completely detached from Hamas, and you can just remove Hamas, put somebody else, and suddenly everything would be great. That's a false notion. It's coming in part from previous administration in the US. It was very supportive of the idea that, okay, let's remove the Hamas regime. And I look at Afghanistan. The US have been able to remove the Taliban regime back in 2002, I think. They put Karzai. Karzai had this great constitution which gives freedom and equality for women. I think it was 2006. And now 20 years later, the Taliban are back in power. Women cannot even speak in public in Afghanistan. We should realize that we cannot control everything.
Yep. We wasted over $2 trillion. We could have just lit the money on fire, and it probably would have been better. So the two-state solution is dead. Tell me, among Israelis, obviously it's dead in the context of like the next few years. Obviously, like that's not going to happen. But in a broader time span, is it pretty much dead among the Israeli population?
It's hard to tell. I suspect that the answer is yes. I think that the Middle East may have more surprises for us. I'm very concerned about what's happening in Jordan. As I said, the West Bank is really here, 10 miles from me. Short-range rockets being fired from the West Bank can land on my apartment, and I am as far from the West Bank as you can be in central Israel. I'm really, I'm really next to the ocean here.
And they, as I point out, they have the higher ground.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. They also have the higher ground. You're absolutely correct. So I think that the idea of having a Palestinian state at this situation I think is not going to go forward. And as I said, as far as Gaza is such an isolated territory in the corner, connected to Egypt, not very close to all of the main Israeli population center, that Gaza can be dealt with geographically in a very different way to the West Bank. The West Bank, we cannot employ the same solution that I'm suggesting to Gaza.
So what I think is going to happen, where will we be in 5 years? And I'd like to hear your take, because I think it's going to be, I think Hamas will probably still be running. Sad to say, they'll probably still be running Gaza. It'll be a nightmare. What do you think?
I think that Hamas would use a ploy where they would try to convince the whole world that there is somebody else in charge. They would call it Palestinian Authority,
Right.
revamped Palestinian Authority, an Arab consortium of state, a technocrat government, professional committee, whatever.
Yeah.
There would be somebody at the front that is not being labeled as Hamas.
It's a
They would control behind the scene.
A Lebanon situation.
Yes, but it could be, it could be 10 different other ways. But we need to keep in mind that Hamas is very large, embedded, ingrained into the Gazan society. While not everyone is Hamas, I'm not saying that 100% Hamas.
Right.
Okay, but the ideology, even those who are politically, they would say, oh, I'm not going to vote for Hamas. They still hold the same ideology.
Yeah, right.
In large part,
So the irony is that actually Hamas agrees with Netanyahu. They also want to be quote unquote defeated and replaced with they would love to be quote unquote defeated, replaced with say the PA. Because
I wrote an article on 2021 where I said you cannot really get rid of Hamas, but on the other hand, Hamas doesn't want to be in charge of the Gaza sewage. That's the conundrum.
Exactly. Last things, I really have a nightmare that Israel, and I predicted this in October. Remember when Israel went into Iran, they said, well, we got rid of all the defenses. Now they're just a sitting duck. And then I noticed, oh, well, where's the follow-up strike? Oh, there is none. And I predicted there's not going to be one, at least for a long time. And I really am concerned Israel is going to miss this opportunity and is going to wake up someday. And because it's bizarre that Iran has no real fighter jets. They have like a plane from 1975. Do you think Israel is going to miss the window of opportunity and wake up in 3 months and Iran will say, hey, look at our new Chinese or Russian fighter jets?
Well, I hope Israel would not miss the opportunity. And, a lot is dependent on what the US is going to do. Some of the Iranian facilities can only be seriously bombed by bombs that are larger than any Israeli plane can carry. Only the US have the B-2 Spirit bombers and the B-52 can carry the the really large bombs to get into some of the nuclear facilities in Iran. There could be many other solutions. I would say just one more thing, that Saudi Arabia should really take a good look who is a threat to them. Israel has no border with them, no dispute, nothing. Israel has nothing against Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, Iran, which already have bombed Saudi Arabia in the past and has the desire to eventually take over all of the Muslim holy sites and capture them for the Shia Muslims, is eyeing to take over Saudi Arabia sometime in the future. And I think that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states should really take a very good look at who is their enemy and who is not.
What do you want Israel to do with the West Bank? Do you want them to annex it all?
That's a tough question. I
Too
don't.
tough.
It
Sorry.
really is a tough question, and I think we should deal with the easier problems first.
Okay,
once we fix Gaza, I think things will be much clearer.
Right. Let me wrap up with this. Netanyahu. How would you grade his leadership since October 7th?
I think he has not been decisive enough.
I often say that I see a left-wing path for Israel's destruction, and I see also a right-wing path, right? So, like, the left-wing path would be like, I don't know, Israelis elect a communist hippie, and he's like, I'm dissolving the IDF, then Israel is destroyed. And then, but
that's not going to happen.
No, I know. I know that. I know that. I'm just joking. That's just an example of what. And then, but I also can see a right-wing path where, let's say, I don't know, Israelis elect Ben Gvir, and it just destroys the alliance with America, and it gets too isolated and gets the Rhodesia treatment. How much do you worry about that isolation issue?
I trust the common sense of the Israeli people and the Israeli democracy not to go into any of those extremes. Although I would say that the right-wing scenario that you painted is more likely than the left-wing.
Right.
But I hope that Israel would remain a center state as it actually is in some way, although it has been much more right wing than left wing, but it's still I think that the overall electorate in Israel is very centrist.
I just want to get your take on what I have been thinking for a while that the next Israeli PM should do. I'm not talking about next year. I'm talking about, let's say, 5 years from now. I think that it would be very smart if the next prime minister, what I would call it, is threw a curveball to the anti-Israel movement and surprised them. Actually, with your policy, that would be a great move. But went to America and said, you know what, we're out of Gaza and they can do whatever they want. Or, and this is where you might disagree, offer, say we're going to freeze settlement construction for 2 years and make an offer, something that is safe, where like Israel would control all the airspace, et cetera, make an offer and let the Palestinians reject it. Just because Camp David was like, it's going to be like 30 years. People don't remember that. And Israel has looked like the bad guy for so long that I think that they need to try to do something like that on the PR front, at least. What do you think?
I think that, first of all, as I said, we need to take care of Gaza. And as far as the West Bank, we need to really understand that 90% or more of the settlers live in very condensed area, which are, in small geographical area. So basically, most of the West Bank doesn't have any settlements. There are, of course, some isolated settlements with very few people spread around in many places. But this is very small percentage of the settlement population. So I don't see right now that we are going to, to disengage from the West Bank. That's not a possibility anytime soon. So I don't see any reason to have any discussions or negotiations or anything right now. It doesn't really help because we are not going to solve this problem anytime soon.
No, I didn't mean right now. I meant like 5-6 years maybe down the road. Yeah.
I think we have bigger issues in the Middle East to deal with.
Thank you so much for your time. Any closing messages you want to say?
No, follow me on Twitter if you like what you hear. Eyal O365.